A woman like you cannot have $100 million. This check is fake. What is your full name? Denise Reeves picked up the check, looked Serena Carter in the eyes, and tore it in half. Then she tore it again. 4 pieces, $100 million, dropped onto the marble floor like trash. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Denise said, her voice steady, almost bored. But women like you don't walk into my branch with checks like this. She stepped closer, lowered her voice just enough to feel intimate, cruel. Honey, $100 million doesn't come from wherever you come from. You know that, right? Serena didn't answer. Denise glanced down at her, then back up, slow and deliberate, taking in every inch. I've worked this branch for years. I know exactly what a black woman with a check like this means, and it doesn't mean what you think it means. 16 customers stood on the marble floors in a silence so thick you could choke on it. Serena didn't bend down to pick up the pieces. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She looked Denise Reeves in the eye and said quietly, "What is your full name?" And then the door opened. What happened next would end one woman's career, expose a system hiding in plain sight for years, and show the world what ma'am really costs when it arrives too late. Stay with this. Drop your location and local time in the comments. And if you're not subscribed, don't leave. This story is only getting started. Serena Carter had been awake since before sunrise, lying in the dark, listening to Atlanta find its morning pulse. She had a habit of waking early, built over years of doing the kind of work that doesn't wait for daylight. Code reviews in the pre-dawn hours. Grant applications finished before most people stirred. Investor pitches rehearsed in a bathroom mirror because the kitchen table was buried in lab reports. Today was different. Today she was going to a bank. She got up quietly, careful not to wake Jada. Her daughter slept the way only children can, completely without apology. One arm thrown over the side of the bed, like she was reaching for something in a dream. Serena stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her breathe. Then she went to make coffee. The kitchen smelled like the old apartment where she grew up. Not because it looked anything like it, but because Serena still made her coffee the same way her mother had. Strong, no sugar, in a dented silver pot that had survived multiple moves and one near eviction. Her mother, Vivian Carter, had been a nurse for decades. Morning shifts at the hospital, then evening shifts when the bills required it. She raised Serena alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of Atlanta, in a neighborhood where the nearest grocery store was a bus ride away and the library was the safest place to be after school. It was in that library that Serena had found biology. Not because anyone pointed her there, but because a book on cellular mutation had a photograph of a cancer cell on its cover, and something about the image stopped her cold. It looked like a city seen from above, chaotic and organized at the same time, operating by its own logic. She was 14. She checked the book out multiple times before the librarian told her to keep it. Vivian had worked double shifts to pay for the community college application, then the state university application. Then, when the scholarship came through, she had sat at that same kitchen table and cried quietly into her coffee so Serena wouldn't hear. Serena heard. Before she left for her first semester, Vivian said one thing that never left her. Science doesn't see color. But people do. Be undeniable anyway. Vivian Carter passed away from a stroke some years ago, still working part-time because rest had never been a language her body knew. She never saw Carter Biotech Solutions. She never saw the patent. She never saw the offer letter printed on heavy cream paper with a number that had 9 digits before the decimal point. But Serena had carried her into every room she had ever walked into. And today, she would carry her into a bank. Carter Biotech Solutions had started in a shared lab space, 300 square feet, one centrifuge, and a lease paid month to month on a prayer. The work was simple to describe and nearly impossible to do. A diagnostic tool for early-stage pancreatic cancer using a biomarker detection method Serena had spent years developing in her own time, on her own funding, with no guarantee that anyone would ever care. Pancreatic cancer had a 5-year survival rate of 12%, largely because it was almost never caught early. Serena's tool could catch it in stage 1. It took years, 3 failed trials, 2 rounds of bridge financing that almost didn't close, and one very long night when the FDA clearance finally came through. Serena sat alone in the lab and let herself cry for the first time in years. By the time Nova International came calling, Carter Biotech had 34 employees, active clients in 9 states, and a peer-reviewed study published in the New England Journal of Medicine. The acquisition offer arrived on a Tuesday morning. Serena's attorney read it 3 times before he could speak. $100 million. The check arrived by courier 2 days later, signed by Nova's CFO, Adrian Park, made out to Serena R. Carter. She could have deposited it from her phone. Wire transfers existed. Mobile deposit existed. She could have watched the number appear in her account from her couch in her pajamas with a glass of wine. But there was something her mother used to say about walking into rooms. They built those rooms to make us feel like we don't belong. The only answer is to walk in anyway, straight back, eyes forward, like you own the floor. Serena chose Meridian First Bank in Buckhead. New building, marble facade, the kind of place that projected professionalism in every detail. She dressed carefully, not to impress, but to be undeniable. Navy blazer, pressed slacks, her mother's leather handbag, old and soft, the handles worn smooth by decades of use. Inside the bag were the check, her passport, her driver's license, a 3rd form of identification, her medical research board credentials, the full acquisition agreement, Nova Pharma's letterhead with Adrian Park's direct line, 3 years of federal tax returns tabbed and labeled, business incorporation papers, and a printed copy of the New England Journal article with her name on the byline. She shouldn't have needed any of it. She knew that. But she had heard enough stories from colleagues, from friends, from strangers who shared them online at midnight to know that the check alone was never going to be enough. She kissed Jada goodbye. Her daughter, still half asleep, looked up from the pillow. "Where are you going?" "The bank, baby." Jada blinked slowly. "Are they going to be nice?" Serena paused just a half second, just long enough to feel the full weight of a child's question. "They should be," she said. She drove to Buckhead, parked, checked her watch, and walked through the glass doors of Meridian First Bank. The lobby smelled like cool air and expensive cologne. Marble floors, recessed lighting, a security camera mounted in the upper left corner, its small red light blinking steadily. 16 customers were in the branch, 3 teller windows, 5 service desks. At the branch manager station, a woman in a gray blazer looked up from her computer screen. Her name badge read, Denise Reeves, branch manager. Serena walked toward her. Denise was on the phone when Serena reached the counter. The conversation looked routine, nodding, typing. The practiced multitasking of someone who had done this job long enough for it to run on autopilot. She held up one finger without looking up. Serena waited. She was good at waiting. Years of grant panels and investor meetings and clinical trial committees had taught her that patience wasn't passive. It was a form of precision. You waited, and you watched, and you learned everything you needed to know about a room before the room knew anything about you. She watched Denise Reeves, mid-50s, sharp posture, The kind of professionalism that lived in the surface of things, the pressed collar, the neutral expression, the slight lift of the chin that said, "I run this floor." Denise hung up and looked at Serena. The shift was small, a fraction of a second, the kind of thing you would miss if you weren't already looking for it, if you hadn't spent your entire adult life learning to catch it before it caught you. The eyes moved from polished welcome to something quieter and colder. Not hostility. Not yet. A recalibration. A silent reclassification. The kind that happens before a single word is spoken. Serena had seen it her entire life. She recognized it the way you recognize the sound of a lock turning. "Good morning," Serena said. "I'd like to make a deposit." She placed the check on the counter. Denise looked at it, then at Serena, then back at the check, and this time the look lasted longer than it should have. Several seconds. Long enough for 3 people in line behind Serena to notice and exchange a glance. "I'll need to see some identification," Denise said. Serena produced her driver's license, current address, photo match, Georgia issue, valid. Denise examined it, typed something into her computer, paused, typed again. Her eyes moved between the screen and Serena's face in a rhythm that was too deliberate to be standard procedure. "Do you have a second form of ID?" "Of course." Serena placed her passport on the counter. Also current. Also valid. Denise held it up beside Serena's face. A gesture public enough, slow enough, performed with enough audience awareness that the woman standing in line directly behind Serena shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "And do you have any documentation regarding the source of these funds?" Serena opened her mother's handbag and laid the documents out in order. The acquisition agreement, the Nova letterhead, the Carter Biotech business license, the incorporation papers, 3 years of federal tax returns, tabbed and organized by quarter. Denise barely glanced at them. She turned each page the way people turn pages when they have already decided what they are looking for and haven't found it. Not because it isn't there, but because they have decided it can't be. "One moment," she said. She picked up her desk phone and dialed an extension. When someone answered, she spoke 3 words loud enough for the 4 nearest customers to hear without straining. "Security to manager." The phrase landed in the lobby like a stone into still water. Serena felt it in her chest. That specific tightening, that specific exhaustion of having to stand still inside a moment that was doing everything it could to move you. Security for a deposit. For a woman who had placed her documents in order on a marble counter and said good morning. She breathed through her nose and kept her face exactly where it was. Derek Wells arrived. Broad-shouldered, mid-40s, 20 years of professional restraint in his posture. He didn't reach for anything. He simply positioned himself 4 feet to Serena's left and stood there. Presence as instrument. Serena reached into her bag slowly, both hands visible, and placed her phone face down on the counter. She pressed record before setting it down. In Georgia, only one party in a conversation needs to consent to its recording. Denise's eyes went to the phone, then back to Serena. "Ma'am, you cannot record on private premises without—" "Georgia is a one-party consent state," Serena said. Quiet, precise, the way she delivered findings at a conference. "I don't need your permission, and I'm not leaving this counter until this deposit is processed, or until you provide me a written explanation for refusing a legitimate transaction." Denise's expression moved through several things in quick succession before settling on something harder and more decided. She turned slightly and dialed the fraud department. Her voice, when she spoke, was not lowered. "Hi." Yes, I have a customer here with a check for $100 million. It seems inconsistent to me. Can you run a verification? Inconsistent. Not fraudulent. Not suspicious. Inconsistent. Serena stood still and let the phone record every word. And then she noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the upper right corner of Denise's monitor, small, almost hidden by the edge of the screen, a yellow sticky note. 3 words, handwritten in dark ink. Verify all. Serena had spent years in research environments. She knew the difference between a note that had been sitting in a corner for weeks and one written that morning. The ink had barely dried. The paper was still crisp at the edges, not yet curled from the air conditioning. That note was written this morning. Who put it there? She thought. And why today? She didn't ask. She filed it away the way she filed anomalous data, in a part of her mind that held things patiently until they made sense. Denise hung up, turned back, and said, "We're going to need additional documentation before we can proceed." Serena looked at the documents already spread across the counter between them. "What documentation?" she said. Not a question. "That isn't already in front of you." Denise said nothing. Instead, she stood up. And that was when it stopped being a difficult transaction and became something else entirely. Denise Reeves stepped around from behind her counter. 3 steps, maybe 4. But the movement changed the geometry of everything. She was no longer behind the professional boundary of her station. She was in the open floor now, beside Serena, where the marble stretched out in every direction and 16 people had a clear line of sight. She held the check between 2 fingers, tilted it slightly, examined it the way you examine something you already believe is wrong, not looking for proof, looking for confirmation. Where did you get this? Not earn, not receive, get. The word was a verdict dressed up as a question. The recording on the counter caught every syllable. "I earned it," Serena said. "From the sale of my company." "What company?" "Carter Biotech Solutions. I am the founder and chief executive officer. We develop early detection diagnostic tools for pancreatic cancer. We were acquired last week by Nova Pharma International for $100 million. That check is the acquisition disbursement. Every document that supports it is on your counter." She said it the way she said it in boardrooms and hospital conferences and NIH grant hearings. Clear, sequenced, without apology. The sentences had been true for years. She had spoken them 10,000 times across a decade of building something from nothing. They didn't get easier. They got more precise. Denise nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are waiting for you to finish, rather than listening to what you say. And Nova just paid you $100 million. The word "just" carried a sentence inside it, a whole set of assumptions folded into 3 letters. "They did," Serena said, "because the company was worth it." Denise turned back to the documents on the counter. The tax returns, the acquisition agreement, the Nova letterhead with Adrian Park's signature. She touched each one briefly, not reading, not processing, just performing the gesture of review. Then she picked up a pen and made a note on a pad angled away from Serena's line of sight. At that exact moment, something happened at the teller window adjacent to Denise's station. A man stepped forward. White, mid-50s, khakis, and a collared shirt. He slid an envelope across the counter without speaking. The teller looked up, asked one brief question. The man produced a single driver's license. The teller typed, stamped a deposit slip, and handed it back. $80,000 processed. Serena watched every second of it. Denise watched Serena watch it. Neither of them said a word about what they had both just witnessed. In the 3rd row of the waiting line, Beatrice Thompson had stopped pretending to look at her phone. She was 81 years old, with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had been a customer at Meridian First Bank for decades, longer than the Buckhead branch had existed, longer than Denise Reeves had been in banking. She had come in today to update her beneficiary paperwork. She had expected to be home soon. She was not going home soon. She watched Denise hold the check between two fingers, like evidence of a crime. She watched the security guard position himself beside a woman who had done nothing but ask for a service. She watched the teller across the room process $80,000 in the time it took Denise to make a single note on a pad. Her face had gone from mild curiosity to something slower and more serious. The expression of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize what she was seeing and was deciding quietly what to do about it. Denise turned back to Serena. Given the size of this transaction, we're going to need to place a 7-business-day hold on these funds while our verification process is completed. Serena said, "Call Nova's CFO." She reached into the documents on the counter and produced a business card. Adrian Park, Chief Financial Officer, Nova International, direct office line, personal cell, email address. She had asked him specifically to be available for exactly this call. He was expecting to hear from the receiving bank. He had told her so himself when they finalized the transfer. His number was on that card. It would take less than a few minutes. She set the card on the counter between them. Denise looked at it, then at Serena, then back at the check still held between her two fingers. She did not pick up the phone. She did not pick up the card. "The signature on this check," Denise said, "doesn't match the standard CFO signature block we have on file for Nova." A beat of silence. "You have Nova's CFO signature on file. We maintain documentation on our corporate clients." "Yes. So you have a banking relationship with this company. You have their CFO's credentials in your system, and you still won't make a short phone call to confirm a transaction that is documented 7 different ways on the counter in front of you." Denise's face didn't change. "I'm following protocol, ma'am." Protocol. The word that means everything and explains nothing. Behind Serena, the line had grown. Some checking their watches, some pretending to look at their phones, most listening with the focused attention of people who understood they were watching something that mattered, even if they hadn't yet decided what to do with that understanding. Derek Wells had moved half a step closer. Beatrice Thompson had put her phone entirely away. And Denise Reeves, the woman who ran this floor, who had decided in the space of a single glance what kind of customer Serena Carter was, looked at the check one final time. Then she tore it in half. The sound came first. A clean, sharp crack of paper, the kind that cuts through ambient noise the way a slap cuts through conversation. Everyone in the lobby heard it. Everyone turned. Denise Reeves held the 2 halves of the check in front of her, one in each hand, and looked at Serena with an expression that had finally stopped pretending to be professional. She had moved past even the performance of procedure. What remained on her face now was something more fundamental. The satisfaction of a person who has decided that what they are doing is not just permitted, but correct. She tore it again. 4 pieces. $100 million reduced to 4 rectangles of paper held between her fingers. She looked at Serena while she did it. She did not look at the check. She looked at Serena, making sure she was watching, making sure it landed exactly the way it was intended to land. Then she opened her fingers. The pieces fell, not thrown, released. They drifted to the marble floor in small, unhurried arcs, landing at Serena's feet in a loose scatter. The gesture was deliberate and precise. By dropping them downward rather than throwing them forward, Denise had made a calculation. If Serena wanted the pieces of her check, she would have to bend down to collect them. She would have to lower herself in front of 16 witnesses. The lobby went completely silent. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people trying not to stare. The absolute silence of people who had stopped breathing. "Security," Denise said. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "Please escort this woman out of my branch. I'm contacting the authorities." Derek Wells didn't move immediately. His eyes went to the floor, to the scattered paper, to Serena standing perfectly still above it. Something crossed his face. Not disagreement, not courage, just the briefest flicker of a man who knew what he was watching and had not yet decided what it cost him. He stayed where he was. The customers in line stood in absolute stillness. Nobody moved toward Serena. Nobody moved away, or nobody said a word. A woman near the front of the line looked at the floor. A man in a business suit looked at his phone. A young woman looked directly at Serena with an expression that held something close to apology, but made no sound. Beatrice Thompson had gone very still and very watchful. Serena did not bend down. She stood exactly where she had been standing, feet planted, back straight, her mother's handbag over one shoulder, the phone on the counter still recording, its screen dark, its memory filling steadily with everything the room had just produced. She had built a company worth $100 million from a shared lab space and a library book she had checked out multiple times at age 14. She had sat in rooms where people looked at her and saw risk before they saw brilliance, and she had converted every single one of them through the undeniable weight of the work itself. She knew how to stand still in a storm. Her mother had taught her that before she knew she was being taught. She looked at Denise Reeves. "What is your full name?" Denise blinked. The question had not been in her script. "Your full name and title," Serena said. "For the record." Denise's eyes moved to the phone on the counter, then back to Serena, then slowly to her own name badge. "Denise Reeves, branch manager." "Thank you, Miss Reeves." Serena reached for the phone, hand steady, no tremor, and checked the screen. She picked up the phone. She reached into her mother's bag and removed the small envelope she had brought for exactly this possibility, because she had heard enough stories from enough people to prepare for the worst outcome and had hoped not to need it. She crouched down, not quickly, not urgently, but with the deliberate precision of a woman making a choice, and collected each piece of the check from the marble floor. All four. She placed them inside the envelope and sealed it with care. Then she straightened up. She took a photograph of Denise's name badge, a photograph of the counter where the documents still lay, a photograph of the security camera mounted in the upper left corner, its red light blinking steadily. She placed the documents back into her mother's bag in the exact order she had brought them. She smoothed the front of her blazer. She was about to turn toward the door, and then it opened. Harrison Holt had not planned to stop at the Buckhead branch that day. He was regional director for Meridian First Bank, decades in financial services, corner office in the downtown tower on Peachtree. The kind of institutional knowledge that made him valuable enough to be consulted before decisions were made, and visible enough to be blamed when they weren't. He had a lunch meeting 2 blocks away and a quarterly review presentation to finish. The branch was relatively new. He tried to do informal site visits to new locations in their first year. No notice, no agenda, just presence. He had parked around the corner on impulse, told himself it would take a few minutes. He walked through the glass doors of Meridian First Bank and saw the paper first. Small, irregular white rectangles scattered across the marble floor near the branch manager's station. The kind of thing that shouldn't be there. The kind of thing that in a bank lobby felt immediately, instinctively wrong. Then he saw the security guard standing in the open floor, posture rigid, eyes straight ahead. Then he saw Denise Reeves, red-faced, one hand still extended in the gesture of pointing toward the exit. Then he saw the woman she was pointing at. His brain processed her in pieces, the way recognition always works. Not all at once, but in a sequence of details assembling into certainty before he had taken 3 more steps. The navy blazer, the particular quality of stillness, the bearing of someone who had learned to be calm inside conditions that would make other people loud. And then her face. And he knew. The blood drained out of his face all at once, completely. "Dr. Carter!" The lobby froze. Denise's extended hand stopped moving. Derek Wells turned his head. The customers in line leaned forward almost in unison, and the ambient hum of the building's climate system became the only sound. Serena turned slowly. She looked at Harrison Holt with eyes that held no surprise whatsoever, no relief, no recognition that changed her posture. No softening, just a measuring look, steady, thorough. The look of a scientist reading data she had been half expecting to find. "Mr. Holt!" Harrison's mouth opened. He closed it. He looked at the floor, at the 4 white rectangles of torn paper near Serena's feet, and his face moved through something that lived very close to horror. "Ma'am, He stopped, swallowed. "What happened here?" Denise rushed forward. "Sir, this woman came in with a check that appeared fraudulent, and I followed standard." "Stop." One word. Said without raising his voice, which made it worse. Not a shout. Something quieter and heavier than a shout. The kind of word that doesn't need volume to end a sentence. Denise's mouth closed. Harrison walked forward slowly. He crouched down. Regional director, decades of seniority, tailored gray suit, and picked up the torn pieces of the check from the marble floor. All 4 of them. He turned them in his hands, fitting the edges together, reading the fragments. $100 million. Serena R. Carter. Nova Pharma. Adrian Park. His hands went still. My God. He stood. He looked at Serena. He looked at Denise. He looked at the security guard. At the row of motionless customers. At the documents still spread across the counter where Serena had placed them. Then, the reflex of the man whose mind was running in 4 directions at once, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled without knowing exactly what he was looking for, driven by instinct more than reason, and he found it. An email from Adrian Park, CFO of Nova International. Harrison, our client Dr. Serena Carter will be visiting your Buckhead branch today to process the acquisition disbursement. Please extend every professional courtesy. She built something extraordinary. Looking forward to our continued partnership. Harrison Holt had received that email hours earlier. He had not read it. He stood in his own branch lobby holding 4 pieces of a $100 million check with that email open on his phone, and the full arithmetic of what had just happened assembled itself in his chest with the cold clarity of something irreversible. He looked at Serena Carter. She was already looking at him, and from her expression, quiet, exact, entirely without surprise, it was clear that whatever was written on his face, she could read every word of it. "You already knew," he said. Not an accusation. A confession. "I knew who I was," Serena said. That was enough. It should have been enough for everyone in this building. The lobby stayed frozen around them. Nobody left. Nobody looked away. Harrison Holt stood there holding the pieces of the check and the weight of a question that would haunt him. If he had read his email that morning, would any of this have happened at all? He already knew the answer. The knowing was the punishment. Harrison Holt knew Serena Carter because weeks earlier he had sat across a conference table from her in a glass-walled room on the 32nd floor of Nova's Atlanta headquarters and shaken her hand. Nova International was not just any corporate client. They were Meridian First Bank's largest regional account, hundreds of millions in institutional deposits, years of banking relationship, a contract Harrison had personally negotiated. When Nova's CFO reached out about extending banking services to key personnel involved in the Carter Biotech acquisition, Harrison had made the trip himself. He had sat across from Serena, listened to her describe the diagnostic tool and the years it had taken to build, and thought privately that she was one of the most composed professionals he had encountered in decades of banking. He had told his assistant that on the drive back. He was now standing in his own lobby, holding the 4 pieces of her torn check. "Mr. Holt," Denise said carefully, "if I could just explain—" "I need you to stop talking, Denise." His voice was measured, not unkind, the tone of a man holding something very fragile. He turned to Serena fully. "Dr. Carter, on behalf of this institution, I want to—" "I'd like to say something first," Serena said. He stopped, nodded once. "I walked into this branch with a legitimate check, a complete set of supporting documents, and a request for a standard banking service. In the course of the interaction, I was asked for 3 forms of identification, while the customer beside me provided one. I was told my check was inconsistent without any definition of what that meant. I was assigned a security escort for the act of making a deposit. I watched a fraud call made in a voice designed to carry across this entire lobby, and then your branch manager destroyed my property, dropped it on the floor, and threatened to call the police. I have the entire interaction on recording." She said it the way she gave clinical findings, sequenced, exact, without inflection that could be argued with. Every sentence was a data point. Together, they built a structure that left no room for reinterpretation. The room, already still, became something beyond still. The kind of silence that means people have stopped performing the act of not listening and are simply openly listening. Harrison said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at Denise, really looked at her, and what remained on his face was not anger, but something colder and more decided. "My office, now." Denise opened her mouth. "Now, Denise." She walked toward the back of the branch, stiff, contained, still not fully understanding how completely the ground beneath her had shifted. Harrison turned back to Serena. "Please, if we could speak somewhere." "I won't be going anywhere private," Serena said. "What needs to be said will be said here, in front of the same people who watched what happened." He absorbed this without argument. "Of course, I want written documentation of today's incident. I want your direct contact information. And I want to know whether this is the first time something like this has occurred in this branch, or simply the first time it was recorded." The last sentence moved through the room like a current. Harrison had no immediate answer, and his silence, the specific unguarded quality of it, was itself an answer, the kind that fills a room faster than words ever could. From the 3rd row of the waiting line, a voice spoke. "My name is Beatrice Thompson." She stepped forward without hurrying, small, composed, 81 years old, with a posture that had not bent in decades. She addressed Harrison Holt directly, without deference, without hesitation. Account number ending in 7714. I have been a customer at Meridian First Bank for decades. I was standing in this line from the beginning of what just happened to the end of it, and I will say everything I am telling you now under oath in any room you care to name. She paused. Then she looked at Serena. That woman did nothing wrong. Not one thing. What was done to her was not a procedure, and it was not a protocol. It was a decision. And everyone in this building watched it happen. She produced a pen from her purse, wrote her phone number on a blank deposit slip from the counter, and held it out to Serena. If you need a witness, you call me. Serena took it. Thank you, Miss Thompson. Don't thank me. Beatrice's voice was soft but exact. This should have been stopped before I was the one who had to offer. Serena opened her bag one final time. She photographed Denise's name badge still visible on the desk. She photographed the counter, the security camera, the lobby clock. She photographed the deposit slip with Beatrice's number and placed it carefully inside the sealed envelope with the torn check pieces. Then she looked at Harrison Holt, at the fragments of check still in his hand, at the unread email still open on his phone, at the expression of a man who understood exactly what the coming weeks of his professional life would require of him. "The word doctor arrived the moment you recognized me, Mr. Holt," she said. Quiet. Final. "It should have been there from the moment I walked in. That's the only thing I have left to say to you today." She picked up her mother's handbag, walked across the marble lobby, straight back, eyes forward, and pushed through the glass doors into the Atlanta afternoon. In the parking lot, she sat in her car for a short while, hands on the wheel, engine off, not shaking, settling, letting the controlled surface give way just enough to confirm that underneath it she was intact. Then she picked up her phone. Not to call the attorney. Not yet. She called someone else first. The line rang twice, then a voice, warm, familiar, decades of knowing exactly what this kind of silence meant. "Baby, what happened?" Serena closed her eyes. "I need to tell you something, Aunt Louise," she said. "And then I need you to remind me what Mama always said about walking into rooms." Serena drove home with the windows down. Atlanta moved around her in its usual afternoon rhythm. Construction cranes over Midtown, the slow crawl on the highway, the particular quality of Georgia light that makes everything look simultaneously harsh and golden. She had lived in this city her entire life. She knew which neighborhoods the highway passed through and which ones the city had decided decades ago didn't need to change. She called Terrence Hale from the driveway. He picked up on the second ring. Terrence Hale was a civil rights attorney with years of discrimination cases across Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. He had a voice that moved slowly on purpose, deliberate, measured, the voice of a man who had learned that speed in his profession almost always cost more than it saved. They had met at a healthcare equity conference years earlier, stayed in touch, mutual professional respect. When the Nova Pharma deal closed, he had sent her 3 sentences. "Congratulations. You earned it. Call me if you ever need anything." "Terrence," she said, "I need an attorney." A pause, not surprise. Assessment. "Tell me everything." She told him, from the moment she walked through the doors to the parking lot. Every request, every refusal, every word Denise Reeves had said at a volume designed to carry across a lobby. The security guard. The 4 pieces of check dropped on marble. Harrison Holt's voice saying, "Doctor," and "Ma'am," after everything it could have prevented. Terrence listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence had weight. The silence of a man organizing what he'd heard into something actionable. "You have the recording." And a witness who offered her contact information voluntarily. Beatrice Thompson, 81 years old, decades as their customer. Another pause. "Serena, I need to tell you something before we go further." His voice shifted, still measured, but something underneath it now. Something personal. "Years ago, I applied for a mortgage in Buckhead. I had substantial annual income, an excellent credit score, and years of documented professional history. The loan officer told me my income streams were, quoting directly, difficult to categorize. I withdrew the application. I never filed a complaint." Serena said nothing. "I'm telling you that so you know who's taking this case and why I'm not charging a fee until we win." She exhaled slowly. "Then let's win." That evening, after Jada settled at the kitchen table with homework, Serena opened her laptop and typed a LinkedIn post. She did not name the bank. She did not post the recording. She wrote 11 sentences about walking into a financial institution with a $100 million check and walking out with torn paper and the reminder that success does not dissolve assumptions. It simply makes them harder to justify. She ended with one line. "I'm sharing this because silence protects systems, And I am done protecting systems that do not protect us. She posted that evening. By the next morning, the post had spread widely. Hundreds of comments, thousands of shares. Jada found her at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee cold. "Did they say sorry, Mama?" Serena looked at her daughter, backpack already on, always asking the exact question that mattered most. "Not yet, baby, but they will." She said, "Sorry isn't the same as accountable. We're working on the second one." Curtis Lang contacted Terrence Hale's office the next morning. He was a construction contractor from Decatur who had tried to expand his business with a small commercial loan. Denise Reeves had denied the application at the Buckhead branch. He had filed an internal complaint. The bank had offered him a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. He had signed it. "I watched Dr. Carter's interview on the local news last night," he told Terrence. "My silence was part of what made that day possible. Whatever breaking this NDA costs me, I'll pay it." Sidney Clark from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reached Serena through a mutual contact days later. She arrived at the coffee shop on Peachtree with a digital recorder, a notebook, and no performance of sympathy. Just the focused attention of someone who had been waiting for a case with this much documentation. "If we publish this," Sidney said carefully, "other people will come forward. People who had the same experience and signed agreements to stay quiet. This could become significantly larger than one torn check." "Good," Serena said. Sidney studied her. "You're certain? The next black woman who walks into that branch deserves better than I got. So does the one after her." Sidney nodded and started writing. Days later, Terrence Hale's paralegal pulled Meridian First Bank transaction records through a Freedom of Information request and found something that made the room go completely still. Days before Serena walked into the Buckhead branch, a man named Kenneth Whitaker had approached Denise Reeves's counter with a check for $85 million, proceeds from the sale of a commercial real estate portfolio. Kenneth Whitaker was white, wearing a fleece vest and boat shoes. One ID. No fraud call. No security escort. No questions about the source of funds. Processing time. Minutes. Serena had left with 4 pieces of paper on the floor. The numbers sat side by side in the file and said everything that words could only approximate. Terrence Hale forwarded the comparison to Sidney Clark that evening with 3 words in the subject line. "Here is your story." That night, Sidney Clark's inbox received an anonymous email. Subject line, "You need to see what they trained us to do." The attachment was dozens of pages. Sidney Clark opened it late that night at her kitchen table, intending to skim the first few pages and return to it in the morning. She read the entire document without stopping. The document was titled Branch Risk Assessment Protocol, version 5.2, Meridian First Bank, internal distribution only, revised years earlier. By page 8, she had called Terrence Hale. By page 12, she had called Serena. The protocol established a tiered system of additional verification steps that branch managers could apply at their discretion for large deposits. The framework itself was not unusual. What was inside it was. Appendix B listed zip codes designated as elevated scrutiny origin zones, areas from which large transactions required automatic secondary review regardless of documentation presented. Sidney pulled up a map and overlaid the zip codes. Southwest Atlanta, Vine City, Pittsburgh neighborhood, Mechanicsville, Bankhead. Every single one was a predominantly black neighborhood. Not one majority white Atlanta zip code appeared on the list. The language throughout the document was careful. The word race did not appear. The words black or minority did not appear. What appeared instead was the phrase historically underserved areas in one section and non-traditional wealth accumulation profiles in another. The architecture of the policy was designed specifically to do what it did without ever saying what it was. Section 4 introduced the concept of appearance-income inconsistency, defined as transactions that present a notable contrast between customer presentation and transaction value. Customer presentation was not defined anywhere in the document. It was explicitly left to the branch manager's discretion. Malcolm Reed had worked in Meridian First Bank's compliance department for years. He had flagged Section 4 in an internal memo years earlier. The memo had been received, acknowledged, and filed without response. He had escalated to senior compliance in a follow-up email months later. That email had also been acknowledged, filed, and ignored. He had resigned earlier that year. He had kept copies of everything. His name was not on the email he sent Sidney Clark, but his documentation was precise, organized, and complete. The work of someone who had spent years in compliance and understood exactly what would and would not hold up under examination. Attached alongside the protocol was Denise Reeves's performance evaluation. Under the category Fraud Prevention and Risk Management, her supervisor had written, "Denise consistently demonstrates proactive identification of high-risk transactions, exceptional instinct, exceeds expectations." Her bonus for this category alone was substantial. Terrence Hale cross-referenced the evaluation dates against the internal complaint log. In that fiscal year, Denise Reeves had flagged multiple transactions for enhanced review. The vast majority of the customers who subsequently filed complaints were Black. The remaining few were Latino. All transactions had ultimately been verified as completely legitimate. None had been fraudulent. Denise Reeves had been rewarded for being wrong in exactly the same direction, over and over, without a single consequence. Sidney Clark published on a Thursday morning. The headline, "Behind the Counter: How Meridian First Bank Trained Its Managers to Profile." The article included the zip code map, excerpts from the protocol, the performance evaluation, the bonus figure, and the Kenneth Whitaker comparison. $85 million, one ID, minutes, days before Serena Carter's experience. Within hours, the story had millions of views. Within a day, national networks and affiliates picked it up. Meridian First Bank stock dropped significantly by the end of the week. The Georgia Banking Commission announced a formal public hearing for the following week. All parties required to testify under oath, live-streamed, open to the public. Tens of thousands of people were watching when it began. Denise Reeves testified first. Her attorney sat beside her, prepared, expensive, careful. The Commission counsel asked her directly, "Ms. Reeves, when you determined that Dr. Carter's transaction was inconsistent, what specifically were you observing?" Denise opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her attorney, looked at the table. The silence lasted seconds that felt eternal in a room with tens of thousands watching. A timestamp on a live stream is not a pause. It is an answer wearing the costume of one. The amount seemed large relative to... She did not complete the sentence. The Commission counsel moved on, but the silence had already traveled further than any answer could have followed. Harrison Holt testified next. He answered every question in full, without deflection, with the precise and quietly devastating honesty of a man who had decided that the only remaining form of dignity available to him was complete transparency. When asked whether he had been in possession of information that could have prevented the incident before it began, he said yes. When asked why he had not acted on it, he said he had not read the email. When asked whether that constituted a failure of professional responsibility, he said yes without qualification. Serena testified last. She had requested it specifically. She sat at the table with her hands folded and walked the commission through every moment of that day. The same sequence, the same precision, the same clarity she had used when she told Terence Hale the story in her driveway. At the end, the commission chair asked, "Dr. Carter, what outcome are you seeking?" Serena looked directly into the camera. "I want this protocol destroyed and independently verified as destroyed. I want every complaint filed against this bank in the last several years reviewed and every victim compensated. I want transparent demographic reporting going forward, every year, publicly available. And I want assurance that the next Black woman who walks into a Meridian First branch is addressed with the word ma'am before she is asked for a single piece of identification. Not because someone important just walked through the door, but because that is the minimum that every human being is owed from the first moment they walk in." The room held its silence for a long moment. Then the commission chair said, "Thank you, Dr. Carter." And the public gallery, which had been instructed to remain quiet throughout, broke that instruction with a sound the chair chose not to suppress. The final order from the Georgia Banking Commission arrived weeks later. Serena read it at the same kitchen table where she had made her mother's coffee for the first time after May died. Same dented silver pot, same strong, dark cup. She read every page without rushing. Denise Reeves was terminated from Meridian First Bank, effective immediately, and barred from employment in any federally regulated financial institution in the state of Georgia for an indefinite period. The commission noted that the bar was subject to review after years, but recommended it be treated as permanent given the documented pattern and an institutional reward structure that had sustained it. Harrison Holt received a formal public reprimand, mandatory retraining in fair lending and civil rights law, and a demotion from regional director to branch development supervisor. A title that carried the same responsibilities with a smaller office and a compensation reduction that made the nature of the reassignment clear without requiring elaboration. The unread email was referenced twice in the commission's written findings, both times without commentary. The commission considered the facts sufficient to speak for themselves. CEO Russell Grant was assessed a personal fine, required to resign from the bank's audit committee, and placed under an individual compliance monitoring agreement. He issued a public statement that accepted full institutional responsibility and did not mention Denise Reeves by name. Meridian First Bank was fined millions and ordered to establish a multi-million-dollar victim compensation fund for customers who had experienced discriminatory treatment over the preceding years. The fund covered dozens of confirmed victims. Terence Hale's office had documented every single one of them, including Curtis Lang, whose non-disclosure agreement was rendered unenforceable by the commission's findings before he ever had to formally break it. The Branch Risk Assessment Protocol, version 5.2, was ordered destroyed. An independent compliance auditor was appointed to verify its complete removal from all systems, training materials, and archived documents. The appointment was for years with mandatory annual public reporting published on the Commission's website. Serena's individual settlement, reached through formal judgment rather than private negotiation, was substantial. She donated a significant portion to the Georgia Civil Rights Legal Foundation the same week the check cleared. She called Spelman College. The conversation lasted minutes. By the end of it, the May Carter Scholarship had been established, full tuition, renewable for 4 years, awarded annually to a first-generation college student from the west side of Atlanta pursuing a degree in science, medicine, or public health. The selection criteria included one requirement Serena had written herself. The recipient must demonstrate, in whatever form they chose, that they had been told at some point they did not belong somewhere and had refused to believe it. Leonard Shaw, who had sent the document to Sidney Clark from an anonymous account, was formally identified during the Commission's investigation. He had known he would to Ben. He had prepared for it. The Georgia Whistleblower Protection Act covered his disclosure entirely. His former employer filed a wrongful disclosure claim that was dismissed quickly. Leonard took a compliance director position at a credit union in Savannah and sent Serena a single text message the day the commission order was published. It was the right thing. It just took too long. She replied with 2 words, "Thank you." Months later, Serena Carter walked into a Wells Fargo branch on Peachtree Road with a check for a major new government research contract, Carter Biotech's first major project under its new structure. She wore the navy blazer. She carried her mother's handbag. The teller, young, professional, looked up before Serena had finished crossing the lobby. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" Before Serena opened the handbag, before she reached for a single document, before she said one word about who she was or what she had built or what she was there to deposit, "Ma'am," at the beginning. As a default. As something that required no credentials, no recognition, no right person walking through the door at the precise right moment to make it happen. Serena stood at the counter for just a beat longer than the transaction required. She thought about Vivian Carter, who had worked double shifts at the hospital for decades and never once walked into a room expecting to be treated like she belonged. She thought about Jada asking from a pillow whether the people at the bank were going to be nice. She thought about Beatrice Thompson writing her phone number on a deposit slip with a steady hand and saying, "This should have been stopped before I had to offer." She thought about the marble floor and the 4 pieces of paper and the word "ma'am" arriving like an apology after everything it could have prevented. And she thought about what it felt like to receive it now, here at the beginning, the way it was always supposed to arrive. She made her deposit. It took minutes. That evening, Jada was at the kitchen table when Serena came home. "Mama, was it worth it? All of it? The lawyer, the news people, the hearing, all of it?" Serena set her mother's handbag on its hook by the door. She looked at it for a moment, the worn leather handles, the soft body shaped by decades of Vivian's hands, still carrying everything Serena needed every time she walked into a room. She turned to her daughter. "Every single second," she said, "because the next woman who walks into that bank won't have to fight for what you and I should never have had to fight for, and neither will you." Jada considered this with the serious attention she gave things that actually mattered. "Good," she said, and went back to her homework. Serena poured a cup of coffee, dark roast, no sugar, in the dented silver pot. Outside, Atlanta moved on in its ordinary way. Construction cranes and traffic and softer light, still deciding what it wants to become. The word "ma'am" should never arrive as a surprise. It should arrive the way daylight does, not because you earned it, not because someone recognized you, not because the right person walked through the door at the right moment to grant it. It should arrive because you walked in. That should always be enough. Serena Carter didn't fight for herself alone. She fought for the woman who signed an NDA and stayed quiet for years. She fought for the one who will walk through that door next week, next year, a generation from now. Dignity is not a reward for credentials. Respect is not a gift for recognition. You do not earn the right to be treated like a human being by proving you are extraordinary. You earn nothing. It is owed. From the first step you take through any door, you have every right to walk through. If this story moved you, if you believe "ma'am" should be the first word, never the last apology, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city and time in the comments. We want to know where in this world people are still fighting for what should already be given. And if you're not subscribed yet, stay with us. These are the stories that don't make headlines until someone refuses to let them disappear.